Barakallahu fikum. We haven't really begun speaking, so if you don't hear, that's why. Pulling some things up, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallama ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa tabi'ina lahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa alayna ma'ahum wa fihim bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Welcome, barakallahu fikum. Continuing this lesson in fiqh or sacred law in this blessed text, Al-Risala, Al-Mukhtasar Al-Latif, Al-Mukhtasar Al-Latif, the subtle treatise, or you could say the subtle abridgment, the quaint abridgment, rather than saying that it's small, adaban ma'al ilm. So rather than saying it's the smaller Mukhtasar, out of adab with knowledge, the Shaykh say Al-Latif. Just like with the weirds of Imam Haddad, rather than saying Al-Wird al-Kabir, the larger weird, and Al-Wird al-Saghir, the small weird, they say Al-Wird al-Latif. Barakallahu fikum. So, I believe that you all have not received the list of intentions. Is that correct? Imam Haddad's intentions? If that's correct, let me know. And if someone can shoot me a link so I can paste things on the whiteboard that you all are taking notes on, I will pass it to you, inshallah ta'ala. They came in email. Okay, cool. Excellent. Alright. Okay. Okay, great. Then if someone would pass me the link. Cool. If I follow this, hopefully my studio won't close. Bismillah. Cool, my studio didn't disappear. Alhamdulillah. Interesting. Gotta copy that though. Hope that doesn't take from my bandwidth. That doesn't seem to be going too well. Anyway. Let me try one more thing, just a moment. If there's any questions from last week, we can start with those. Barakallahu fikum. I just want to send you this so we can start with it. Okay, so that's when it froze with the conditions of skin to kin. Thanks for that. Inshallah, we'll start there. Cool. I was wondering. How we do the head? طيب مرحبا. Water is put on each time. Yeah. Water is put on each time for that. طيب. So inshallah ta'ala, for those that haven't received it already, it will be posted on the whiteboard today. And also review the version you have. We made some changes to the translation of those intentions. Well, again, we'll start by mentioning those intentions of Imam al-Haddad. And they are, we intend learning and teaching, remembering and reminding, giving and receiving benefit and gain, encouraging adherence to Allah's book and the sunnah of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inviting to guidance and leading to goodness, seeking therein Allah's countenance, pleasure, nearness, and reward. Transcendent and exalted is He, or glorious and exalted is He. And we intend what the author, Abdulrahman bin Abdullah Ba'fadl, Allah yarhamu, our shaykhs and the pious have intended, and what Allah knows of virtuous intentions, and we ask Allah to accept. Barakallahu fikum. So we have to finish up the last point again on things that break ablution, and we will also review the previous points prior to then covering those things that are forbidden when our wudu has been broken, and etiquettes of going to the lavatory. So first of all, we're just going to take these few questions that are up and then move on to the material, and then you can keep sending your questions as you like them, or as they come, excuse me. La ilaha illallah. Okay, for wiping the head, you do fresh water each time. Eating or drinking while performing wudu, for Sumayya's question, doesn't have any impact on the validity of wudu. And water is put on each time when wiping the head. You wipe the head thrice each time with fresh water, as you do the ears. When making wudu, should we submerge the entire foot in water? There's no need to, but if you'd like to, and you're in a place where you can do so, you're welcome to do so. There's some issues with used water if you're working from a small quantity of water that we can discuss in their place, inshaAllah. Okay. Marriageable kin. You should have received on your whiteboard, or what is it, your class notes, your course notes, a list of the 18 people who are non-marriageable kin. And actually, the term we discuss is non-marriageable kin, which is a translation by Shaykh Hafidhullah of mahram. For Sidi Jibril, if one puts henna on his beard, rinses out his beard, but then after making wudu finds traces of henna in the beard after making wudu, is it a problem with the wudu? If henna remains stuck to the beard, yes, it's a problem because it's blocking the water from reaching all of the hair. And we'll discuss that when we discuss conditions of wudu. You can't have a barrier on any of the areas that's being washed or wiped that prevents water from getting to that area. Circumcision is off our subject, and you could email me that. You could email me that one, inshallah. Or you could email that to Seeker's Guidance Q&A. Barakallahu feekum. I'm going to clear the chat for a sec, and then we're going to start with number 4 of things that break wudu, which will give us a chance to mention some of the mahrams, inshallah. And Tayyib, so your handout last week, we did 1.3 nullifiers of ablution. So first of all, everyone, just looking at your screen, look at the nice little glare in my glasses or something. How many things break wudu? First of all, just first and foremost, how many things break wudu, everyone? Inshallah, we hope everybody knows this. Everybody chimes out the correct number. How many things break wudu? 4. Does everyone agree? 4. Have we reached hadd al-tawatur? MashaAllah, we say so. Yes, 4 and only 4. Khalas. When we start studying najasa, if someone asks, does touching a dog break your wudu? The whole class can politely, when we ask the question, answer and say no. It's not on that list. It's not one of those 4. Bleeding, laughing in prayer, things that break wudu in other schools, they don't necessarily break wudu in this school. Only these 4 in this school. In the understanding of the proofs from the Quran and Sunnah of Imam Shafi and the Imams of his madhab do not break the wudu. 4 things break ablution. Does the emission of ejaculatory fluid, sexual fluid, mani, akramakumullah, does that break wudu? Does the emission of sexual fluid break wudu? No, that's the correct answer. Yep. So that renders something greater obligatory in general. So the lesser thing in specific is not rendered obligatory. There you go. So ghusl is a greater matter. It's a general matter, and that's rendered obligatory. So the specific smaller matter is not rendered obligatory also. Tamam. Fuqaha think in an unusual way. You got to kind of get used to the way they think. The only benefit of that is if someone called out, anyone who's in wudu gets $100, and someone who's in wudu without having a major ritual impurity, they could accept that $100, but they can't do anything with it because more things are forbidden in a state of major ritual purity than are in a state of minor ritual impurity, and it's all of these things from minor ritual purity and more. So you can't do anything with it except the benefit is that you have ablution. Tayyib. In what case does sleep not break wudu? In what case does sleep not break wudu? Aywa, tamam. When one sleeps sitting firmly, and those conditions are well known, you should have them in your notes. Someone sleeps firmly, which means there's no space between their bottom and what they're sitting on. They're of moderate build. They wake up in the position in which they fell asleep, and know someone who's trustworthy or ma'asum in one position doesn't inform them that their wudu was broken while they're sleeping. And you could put a note there, please. Last week I mentioned that there's a word I was struggling to find. And the word is loss of consciousness, can also be loss of discrimination. Loss of discrimination. So one loses tamyiz, which can be translated as discrimination. So a person might be drunk, God forbid, accidentally or due to some anesthesia, and they've lost their discrimination, but like they technically still have movement and maybe slurred speech or something. That person, their ablution is gone still. Or a madman. Allah protect all of our intellect. Allahumma qadayta alayya min amrin fahfad alayna al-aqla wad-deen. We ask Allah whatever He decrees to preserve our religion and our reason. You could also say loss of reason by sleep or other than it. That'd actually be a nice translation. Shaykh Dr. Omar translates aqal as reason, but what's meant there is discrimination. Tamyiz. Nah. Zain, you guys are doing well. Tayyib, so two things. La ilaha illallah. And then, now did we cut off on number 3, skin-to-skin contact between a man and a woman, or did we cut off on number 4, touching a human being's genitalia? Three. Wow, I didn't realize we cut off that early. Yeah, I think the issue is was the browser I was using. So, the 5 criteria. Okay, inshallah, we'll quickly review 3 again and then do 4. I'm really sorry about that. I didn't realize that. Anyway, I'm trying a different browser this week, and I hope that it won't freeze. I think it was a browser that was freezing, and not my connection, because it happened on 2 different connections. It happened in Jordan and here. I think it's just the stream is kind of heavy bandwidth, and worked my browser a little bit hard. So, let me clear the chat real quick and we'll continue with that. La ilaha illallah. Actually, before continuing, just one point about the sunnahs. We covered the sunnahs finishing up wudu prior to doing these obligations, or excuse me, these nullifiers of ablution. And the sunnahs, inshaAllah ta'ala, we're applying them all and more that we know. We're doing all of those sunnahs, inshaAllah ta'ala, in our wudu and more. The benefit of knowledge comes through acting upon it. They say, al-ilmu yunadi bil-amal wa in ajaba wa illa rutahal. Knowledge calls out to action, and unless action responds, knowledge departs. So we should act upon what we know, and that's where the benefit comes from, or that's really the benefit of learning, is so that you can act, and that is a means to receiving knowledge taught by Allah. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. And have wariness of Allah, have taqwa of Allah, and Allah will teach you. And if someone acts upon what they know, Allah bequeaths them knowledge of what they do not know, as comes in the athar and the tradition. So, la ilaha illallah, we should act upon our knowledge. Learning the likes of those sunnahs and then not acting them is like someone going to a skilled doctor and receiving a prescription and then not just taking the medicine and sticking it in the refrigerator. And every time they get a new prescription, they just stick it in the refrigerator. So if they don't find any change in their health, they should only blame themselves because they didn't take the means. So we should act. We should act and take the means that the Prophet, our teacher and doctor and guide, gave us. And when they read this lesson, the lesson on sunnahs that we took last week, and there'll be young people, like kids or pubescents. When they'd come the next day to their circle, their shaykh would ask them, "Where's your siwak?" Everybody, where's your siwak? And obviously the meaning isn't that they want this little relatively inexpensive wood stick that any of the kids could actually, in these parts, find on their own, pull it off the bush themselves because they're around. But what they mean is, where is your acting upon your knowledge? Where is your taqwa? And if the kids didn't have siwaks, they wouldn't get a dars, mashi dars. So, mashallah, it's the end of time. We don't like to make that argument. We're not going to hold everybody to that, but we should, figuratively, where is your siwak? After you learn sunnahs of al-Mustafa, especially a great sunnah like the siwak, a sunnah for which the Prophet ﷺ said, two rak'ahs with siwak is better than 70 without siwak. After learning something like that, we should be ready to act, and we should have our siwak ready and be doing it when we pray and doing it when we make wudu, at least brushing our teeth before and after bed, the intention of siwak, acting upon those important sunnahs. And incidentally, that hadith is narrated by Dar-Qutni and Imam Ahmed and others. Al-Ajluni in Kashf al-Khafa, he said that it is well authenticated, Hasan. And Al-Haythami in Majma' al-Zawayid said that hadith, the narrators were thiqat, that which means trustworthy. And I only say that because a student mentioned that in a khutbah, and afterwards someone came up to him and said, "Oh brother, that hadith is weak." And there's a lot of issues there that need to be discussed, and they're beyond our scope. First of all, it's su'u adab. The most you could say is, some of the ulama say a chain of transmission is weak. As for the hadith, None of the hadith of Al-Habib, of Al-Qawi, Habib Al-Qawi, the beloved of the strong and mateen, are weak. The chain might have some concern with some of the ulama. I don't know about this one, but other chains might have some concern. And in this case, what we found was Ajluni and Al-Haythami said it was between well authenticated or that the narrators were thiqat, were trustworthy. Alhamdulillah. Barakallahu fikum. Tayyib. So, number 3. Going back to 1.3.3. Skin contact. Okay, so we're discussing skin contact between a man and woman who are both mature and not each other's non-marriageable kin. And we said that there are 5 conditions here. So there's 5 things that have to occur for this skin contact to break wudu. First, that they be of different sexes. Or first, know that the contact be with skin, right? So the contact has to be with skin. Skin excludes hair, nails, teeth, etc. Yani everything other than skin. Between a man and a woman, they have to be of opposite sexes. So contact between a man and a man and a woman and a woman, that doesn't break ablution from this point of view. And they both have to be mature. Mature here is a translation of kabir. And we avoided saying that they had reached puberty because bulugh in sacred law, or reaching puberty as you could translate it, it has specific criteria, and being mature as defined in this question doesn't necessarily imply that you had reached puberty as defined by the sacred law, though if you reach puberty as defined by sacred law, then that necessarily means that you've reached what's called maturity, or we're calling maturity, which we're going to define in a second in this question. So by mature here, we mean that the person has reached the point where they are desirable to people of a healthy disposition of the opposite sex in that place and time by common acknowledgement. So mature, we mean people who have reached the point of being desirable to those with a healthy disposition in that place and time by common acknowledgement. So what does that mean? The upshot of that, practically speaking, that like a healthy woman in that society would say that this young man is now sexually attractive, meaning that she could have a crush on him, for instance. Below that point, or if somebody's unhealthy, then we call, they're still saghir, they're still immature. When they reach the point where they're mature enough physically, and you're talking here about their physical appearance, that they would be desirable, then we call them mature or kabir with respect to this question. So just understand this is a technical term in this question. They've reached the point where they're desirable. And now if, for instance, there's something, their body didn't develop as fast as others, but they reach the point where they reach puberty as defined by the sacred law, then we call them necessarily mature in this question as well. So once a young boy or a girl has nocturnal emission past 9 lunar years of age, or reaches 15 lunar years of age exactly, or a girl, if she menstruates after 9 lunar years, when any of those things have happened, we call them mature in this question, even if their appearance hasn't hit the point where they would be considered desirable. Otherwise, mature is the basis here, and that's that their appearance reaches a point where they're considered to be desirable. Inshallah ta'ala, if that's not clear, you could ask some questions about it. We kind of discussed 2 points there. La ilaha illallah. So that was 3. They're called mature. 4 is that they are not non-marriageable kin. So they're not mahram. So they're not each other's non-marriageable kin. Like a man and a wife. A man is not his wife's mahram. Otherwise, they couldn't be married. So if a man touches his wife, breaks ablution. And we'll do, in just a second, we'll run through the list of non-marriageable kin again, inshallah. And then the fifth, it's not mentioned explicitly here, is that there not be a barrier, even a very thin barrier. So, for instance, latex gloves, that's a barrier. So if someone had latex gloves, for instance, someone of the opposite sex who is examining you or giving you a shot, which is permissible with conditions, that's another subject of discussion. But for instance, someone touches you through latex gloves, your wudu is not broken because there's a barrier. So again, the five criteria for wudu being broken by skin-to-skin contact is that it be with skin between members of the opposite sex who are mature, and again, that's a technical term in this question, which we defined. They're not each other's non-marriageable kin, and there is not a barrier. So with those five, wudu is broken, and that is from the saying of Allah Most High, لَمِسْتُمُ النِّسَاء, or if you've touched women, which in that qira'ah, لَمِسْتُم, there's also a recitation, لَمَسْتُم. لَمِسْتُم means specifically and literally, or it means literally that you've touched their skin, just basic skin-to-skin contact. And that was the madhab of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. Some of the other companions differed as to other schools. That's a tough question in the Shafi'i school, but that is the position of the school. And if someone wanted to take a dispensation, for instance, around the house to remain in a state of wudu all the time, or when sleeping, Suhrawardi mentioned a position that was basically like the Maliki school for sleeping, someone who wanted to sleep in wudu, as long as they weren't stimulated by physical contact to the extent that they're, was significant, then they should go ahead and just sleep with the wudu that they had. And however, someone who's a person of azima, of like taking more religiously cautious positions, which is a good thing, with provided it's done sincerely and not harshly towards others. People of spiritual travel should be people of azayim, people of religiously cautious positions. Someone who wants to take an azima with respect to touching Allah's book, certainly praying, and many of their states, they should make sure that they have wudu according to the school that they're following, or even a more difficult position. But then for certain things such as sleeping and so forth, there's some ease there that even great imams like As-Suhrawardi gave. La ilaha illallah. And then for those who are in a pinch, if you look at the Q&A archives of Qibla.com, the Shafi archives, formerly SunniPath.com, and Allah preserve all of its teachers and workers, and you search dispensations and tawfiq and wudu, you'll find from Shaykh Amjad Rashid a dispensation for this point in general, wudu and prayer. For those that wanted to follow other than the Shafi school in wudu and still pray on the Shafi school, there is a dispensation there, and sometimes you may find yourself in a pinch and may need to use it or give some ease to others. So we said we would discuss the mahrams, and inshallah you're seeing the mahrams on your class notes. Inshallah you see on your class notes, you're seeing unmarriageable kin, right? It's posted. Okay, cool. Alright, so the unmarriageable kin are, it's defined, mahram is defined as being those who are forever forbidden to marry because of kinship, suckling, or being in-laws. By kinship, we mean blood relations, family relations. By suckling, we mean wet nursing, that like a woman nursed a child who was not her own, so she becomes that child's mother through suckling, and her husband becomes that child's father through suckling, and so forth. So that's the general definition, but the easiest way to define these is just by listing them, because there are not many. There's 18. There's 7 from kinship, and that is from the verse, the saying of Allah, حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ وَأَخَوَاتُكُمْ وَعَمَّاتُكُمْ وَخَالَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُ الْأَخِ وَبَنَاتُ الْأُخْتِ. So Allah said, speaking to men, and in other verses He speaks to women about their mahrams, but this one lists the 7 of kinship very clearly. Forbidden for you, meaning speaking to men, and women can just reverse it. Forbidden for you are your fathers. Excuse me, forbidden for you are, I reversed it. Forbidden for you are your mothers, daughters, sisters, paternal aunts, maternal aunts, daughters of your brothers, meaning nieces from your brother, and daughters of your sister. So those 7. Parents, children, siblings, paternal aunts and uncles, maternal aunts and uncles, nephews from the brother, and nephews from the sister. So 7. 7 are forbidden. Parents, children, siblings, paternal aunts and uncles, maternal aunts and uncles. In Arabic that's quite clear. It's ammat and khalat. It's a little bit less clear in English, but paternal aunts and uncles, maternal aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews from the brother, and nieces and nephews from the sister. So those 7 are forbidden from family relations, and parents means parents and on up. So like mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, and so forth. Daughters means and on down. Daughters, granddaughters, great-great-granddaughters, and so forth. And the same with uncles and nieces and everything. And then the same 7 from suckling are forbidden. So your mother's from suckling, your father's from suckling. Fathers are the men who the milk was attributed to them because in a lawful marriage he fathered that child. Siblings from suckling are like other people suckled by the same person or that person's children, and same for the uncles and aunts and nieces and nephews. So you got to be careful with suckling, because you can make a whole extended family mahram for you due to that. And if somebody wet nurses another person's child, they need to write it down and even put it in their will, because it's a big deal. If they find out later, it can be a big problem. Sayyid Habib Umar, we were reading one of these books, said that there was a wedding, there was an old woman who was invited, and nobody really paid her any attention. They didn't, have her sit to the front as you should, an elder, and, escort her in and escort her out and so forth. They just, let her do her thing. So she is leaving. She said, La ilaha illallah. Nobody showed me any respect, and I wet nursed the groom and the bride. So one wants to be careful there. Tayyib, and then in-laws. In-laws, also there are 4. The spouse's parent. So like your wife's mother. The spouse's child, like your husband's or wife's son or daughter. And notice we put an asterisk there. There's a detail there. Your child's spouse, like your son's wife. In my case, my son, Allah bless him and preserve him. He's a wife. She's mahram for me. And your parent's spouse. And there's an asterisk there too. So it's spouse's parent, spouse's child, child's spouse, parent's spouse, your stepdad or your stepmom. Okay, in the case of the spouse's child and the parent's spouse. The wife's daughter is forbidden only after consummation, i.e. and the mother's husband. So a man's stepdaughter is forbidden after he's consummated the marriage with the mother and not before, and that's from the explicit statement of the Quran. And similarly, a girl's stepdad is forbidden after she has consummated the mother has consummated the marriage with the father, and that's in your notes, inshallah ta'ala, and you have that. So barakallahu feekum. La ilaha illallah. For the question, would one's maternal uncle's wife be considered an aunt and thus mahram? The answer is no. The answer is no. She's not mahram. La ilaha illallah, and Allah knows best. If you're from a Muslim society, meaning an ethnically Muslim people who, they're obliged to learn these questions and apply them, yani, you have to kind of delicately teach that question, because unfortunately, even like cousins and stuff, people who are clearly not mahram, it's become diffuse in those societies, for instance, to like make people shake hands, and you're expected to do it, or it's rude, or to sit at a table together with auras exposed. That's an issue, so you got to tactfully deal with it. If you're from a non-Muslim society, you mean you embraced Islam, or you have non-Muslim family members, mashallah, you got to really have a lot of tawajjuh and tuma'nina, and pull that one off, inshallah. If you will really make a resolve to obey Allah, you'll find that the things around you tatafa'al ma'ak, yani, things around you cooperate. It's Allah's creation, subhanahu, so He can make it cooperate. Mother-in-laws, how about a boy's stepmother? A boy's stepmother is right there. That is your parent's spouse, for the boy and the girl. Now, if you mean, is she forbidden before consummation? The answer is it's not related to consummation. Immediately with the contract, she's forbidden. So boy's stepmother is forbidden immediately with the contract. The girl, it's with consummation, but for the boy, it's immediately with the contract. Mother-in-law's sister. Mother-in-law's sister is not mahram. Yep, mahram, you look back to the definition we gave you, they're forever forbidden to marry. So, your sibling's spouse is not mahram. Sibling's spouse is forbidden to marry because it is forbidden to marry two siblings simultaneously. So a man who's married cannot marry as a second wife his wife's sister. But if his wife is divorced, or if his wife dies, he can marry the sister, just as Sayyidina Uthman did. He was married to two daughters of the Prophet ﷺ, Sayyidatina Ruqayya and Sayyidatina Kulthum, and for that reason his nickname is Lu an-Nurayn. So you can't join two sisters at one time, and that's in the Quran, but they're not a mahram as defined in this question, because they're not forever forbidden to marry. No. And we want to keep moving, inshallah. The real place of this discussion is actually the chapter of marriage. They mention it as a tangent here because it relates to this question, but we should keep going. 4, touching a human being's genitalia, front or back, with the inside of the palm or fingers. Okay, what does that mean? By the front genitalia, we mean where the two lips of the woman's genitalia come together, or just like the shaft of the man's genitalia, not his testicles. And by the part, and in the back, it means just the anus, akramakumullah. And what it means from the hands is that if you put your hands together like this and press them lightly, what's covered, and then you do the same with your thumbs, that's the part that breaks will do. The backs of the hands or between the fingers does not, or anywhere around the genitalia, but not just not on those areas that were mentioned, like just touching the hair of the genital area, that wouldn't break will do. And Allah knows best. For sisters, mahram, what does mahram mean? No. Excuse me, I was thinking of a different definition. Basically, there are rulings related to people, like how much you can see of someone and whether or not you can be alone to someone, and they revolve around the mahram. I don't want to go into detail here because that's really from the chapter of marriage, and also just because it's such a hot topic, it really needs a thorough treatment right now. It's sensitive. It's sensitive, and admittedly, in a society where knowledge is not broad spread, or even a majority of the people are not even Muslim, it's difficult to apply. So for that reason, I don't want to open up that can of worms because we're not going to give it the treatment it deserves. However, there are rulings related to those, and one is obliged to know them. Inshallah, if Allah blesses our lifespan, we'll have a chance to read some of the sections from marriage at some point with you all, or someone else will, and you'll learn some of those, inshallah. Allah give us tawfiq. If you marry someone drying off the towel and your hand, the inside of your palm touches the buttocks, no, the buttocks doesn't break wudu. Only the part we mentioned. Yeah, we'll mention that and we'll tell a story about that. Because that we will say about this question. That, I remember Shaykh Hafidhahullah, one of my brothers who's one of his students, told me that he told them after September 11th to go into the airport like you own the place. And like even in the perceptible material world, someone who has confidence, it has an impact on the way people deal with them. And someone who seems uncomfortable or embarrassed, aggressive people are going to deal with you more aggressively when you're like that. And confidence and being aggressive are different. So we're not telling anyone to be aggressive or in your face or harsh or anything like that. But what we can say is that in the time Allah has enabled us to travel with Sayyid Habib Omar Hafidhahullah, that's exactly, he doesn't go into the airport or the plane or whatever like he owns the place. He goes there like he's worshiping the one who owns the heavens and the earth, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we actually were going to write an article about praying on planes. La ilaha illallah. And when it's time to pray, he just gets up and prays, right in the aisle, right in first class. We pray in Jama'at. On the ground, pray in Jama'at like 4 people, in the ladies' galley. And alhamdulillah, we hopefully are trying to learn that lesson. So we were on a plane on Turkish Air from Sana'a to Istanbul. So if you look at the map, Sana'a is almost directly south of Mecca, and you fly right past Mecca to the point where you can maybe even see it when you fly over on certain flights. On that flight, I don't know if I could have seen it, but we were going right by it and west. So the Qibla is going to be basically towards the right of the plane. You can't really easily pray in the aisle. So I got up and I asked the stewardess, and this is this Turkish girl, Muslim, mashallah alayha, and she asked, she saw me standing. I said, "Are we going over Mecca?" She said, either the first thing she said is, "You can pray in your seat, or you can't pray in the galley." Or that was the only thing she said. You can't pray in the galley. So then I said, "Look, I have to pray, and I'm going to pray." And nicely, I wasn't harsh about it, but just smile. That's one thing. Rely on Allah, and you're following the sunnah of the one who smiled more than anyone. I'm going to pray. I said, time to pray. I'm going to pray. And she says, no, I was in economy. I was in economy on Turkish Air. And she said, "Okay, then pray for me." Right? So already her imaniyat are coming out. And I'm only saying it for the sake of the story. She was an uncovered Turkish girl, and Turkey, they had a real harsh secularism that, her generation would have caught a portion of that. So she said, "No, but pray for me." Right? So mashallah, she's beginning to cooperate. So then I just said, "Look, ma'am, I'll really pray for you if you let me pray in your kitchen." So marhaban. Her and her fellow stewardess cleared out the kitchen, and I just made salah, alhamdulillah. And the same trip we were coming back, and this time I was coming from Denmark to Istanbul. So the Qibla was like standing in the aisle and turning to the right, which would have been south a little bit. So I was praying southeast. And in front of me, there were these two old Danes. And they kept looking back while I was praying. So I had to actually close my eyes because it was distracting it right in front of me. If something's in front of you and it's distracting you, you should close your eye. So I closed my eyes, but they were looking back and talking with themselves and laughing. So I thought, man, because there's a real racism towards the Muslims in Scandinavia. In any case, I just made dua, Allah guide them. And then I finished my prayer, and then it turns out that they were drunk, poor things, because I knew that after, because they kept ordering drinks from the stewardess. So they weren't laughing because they were trying to mock anybody. They were just drunk, and somebody was doing something behind them. So then we get out, and I think I was able to help the lady down with her overhead baggage. So then the man pats me on the shoulder, and he's all, "You're a really special person, and we like you," or something like that, or "We love you." And they were just totally nice to me, and that's, an old couple in a place where there's a lot of tension. No problem, man. Just worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's a tradition to this effect. The lafz of it escapes me right now. But if someone pleases Allah, even though it might displease the creation, Allah casts into the heart of the creation a pleasure or respect for that person. And if someone displeases Allah in order to please the creation, Allah casts into the heart of that person a contempt. So you're worshiping the one who holds their hands and their forelocks in his grasp, subhanahu, who is the changer of hearts, muqallib al-qulub. He changes the hearts of the creation. So just worship him, subhanahu, following the sunnah though, and that's a long discussion. And that's a long discussion, and a lot of us have made many mistakes on that. Follow the sunnah and learn the sunnah and try to have prophetic character and depend on Allah. And at the end of the day, it's His pleasure you're seeking and not anyone else's. Though someone who does that, Allah will tend to cast a respect into the hearts of others for that person. No, I can't tell that one. I'm already worried that Imam Afroz is going to be like, "Abdulkarim, you went on too many tangents." Look, we have 23 minutes to finish 2 rulings, so now we got to come over these rulings, inshallah ta'ala. Tamam. So that is a little bit about mahrams and so forth. La ilaha illallah. I'm going to clear the chat again. La ilaha illallah. Barakallahu feekum. Okay, so we want you to focus on your notes now, and this is the next handout. And this is 1.4. This is 1.4, and these are forbidden things for someone in a state of ritual impurity. So we've learned what breaks will do. We have learned what breaks will do. And he said, فَصْلًا فِيمَا يَحْرُمُ عَلَى الْمُحْدِثِ. So chapter concerning those things that are prohibited for one in a state of ritual impurity, a state of hadath. And he says, مَنْ انْتَقَضَ وُضُوءُهُ حَرُمَ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةِ. Okay, so the following are forbidden for someone whose ablution is nullified. Okay, they are 4. So in summary, you can say 4 things are forbidden for someone whose ablution is nullified. The first one is prayer. Okay, there's a couple details here. By prayer, we mean prayer and any type of prayer or things that are similar to prayer, which means prayer, whether obligatory or recommended or voluntary, right? Obligatory sunnah or voluntary, fard, nafal, sunnah. We also mean salat janaza, and we also mean the prostrations of forgetfulness and prostrations of thanks and Quran recitation. So all of those are considered prayer here. An exception to this is the prayer of someone who has nothing with which to purify themselves, meaning no water or earth for dry ablution. They lack the 2 purifying substances. That person just prays for the sanctity of the time, and they have to make it up. And another exception when prayer is not forbidden for someone in a state of ritual impurity is someone who has chronic annulment of ablution, like a man who is incontinent. His urine never stops. He has a special technique he has to follow, and he may pray. He's ritually impure, but he may pray and he may do other things for the darura, because it's absolute necessity. And also a woman who's in a state of abnormal bleeding. Okay, so that is prayer. That's pretty straightforward. One does not pray when one is not in a state of wudu. We'll see why when we discuss conditions of the prayer. Wudu is a condition of the prayer. And then second, circumambulation of the Kaaba. Circumambulation of the Kaaba. So tawaf, whether obligatory, sunnah, wajib, or voluntary, is not permissible without ablution. The Prophet ﷺ taught us, and this hadith is a hujjah, it's proof. الطواف بمنزلة الصلاة إلا أن الله قد أحل فيه النطق. He said prayer is of the same level, is like the level of, circumambulation is like the level of prayer, except that Allah has made speech permissible therein. So tawaf is like prayer. You have to have purity in order to do tawaf. You can't do tawaf without wudu. La ilaha illallah. Naam. Touching Quran. Touching Quran. Literally here, this means mushaf. Okay? So mushaf is the word. And what mushaf means is Quran which was written to be studied. Not meaning like scholarly study, but read and recited and reflected on and so forth. as opposed to being written for just the blessing of it, like an amulet. So one may not touch Quran that was mushaf, that was written for study, as opposed to for the blessing or protection, like an amulet. And that applies to the whole mushaf, the whole Quran, the book, all of the pages, the margins, the cover. Even like if a Quran has a special box for it, when the Quran is in the box, you can't touch the box. And that touching here means direct touching as opposed to touching it through a barrier. So touching is one ruling. And again, that applies to the cover, the pages, the margins, and so forth. There's an exception. Unless that touching is for absolute necessity, like you're afraid of it getting lost, or you're afraid of it getting affected by filth or something, somehow desecrated, and there's no trustworthy Muslim who you can entrust it to. So if you fear losing it and you just have to keep carrying it, you're all by yourself in a foreign airport, for instance, and you lose your ablution, you can't stick it on, set it on the floor in the middle of the airport lounge or something. You have to, you have to keep it with you and go somewhere safe and make wudu, and go somewhere where you can make wudu and keep it safe while you do that. So if you fear losing it or falling into something like filth or something that would be disrespectful, and there's no trustworthy Muslim that you can give it to, then in that case there's necessity that allows you to keep touching it. Otherwise, you're not allowed to touch it. La ilaha illallah. Okay, so 3 is touching the Quran. And then notice that carrying the Quran, carrying mushaf, is treated as a separate ruling. So one could touch it without carrying it. For instance, if it was in a Quran stand. And one could carry it without touching it, for instance, in a bag, in a book bag. So touching is one thing and carrying is another, and they're 2 separate rulings. Okay, carrying it is also impermissible for someone whose ablution has been nullified. And he says, carrying it as well as a wooden tablet with Quran written on it for study. So Quran written to be learned or just recited is mushaf. So if it's written on a wooden tablet, if it's written on a notepad that you're studying from, or you wrote a surah on a flashcard, that is the same. Now there's an exception that he's going to mention. And we might have even wanted to make space between that and the last sentence, but in any case, you can make space in your notes if it makes it clear for you. It is permissible to carry it among everyday objects and on coins. So on coins may sound kind of odd, but some of the sultans, when they would mint Muslim coins, like dirhams for instance, they would stamp Quran on them. So that Quran is not mushaf, it's not written for study. You can carry coins that have Quran on them. Now, carrying it among everyday objects, we want you to focus in on this ruling because it's needed, and take good notes here. Okay, if someone carries Quran, for instance, in their briefcase or their book bag, they have a Quran as well as a fiqh book, as well as a notebook, as well as a cookbook or whatever, or as well as a Quran and a pen, They have one pen, an ink pen with which they write, and they have a Quran. They have even something real small. They have in their book bag a Quran and a scarf pin, a little sandal of the Prophet scarf pin. The Fuqaha mentioned even a needle. They have a needle. So they have some of their belongings, and they have their Quran in a bag or wrapped up in a scarf or something, or a shawl. There's 4 possible intentions here, right? Write these down. 1, that you're carrying just your objects. You're just carrying your belongings. You just intend that you're carrying your belongings. I'm carrying my stuff, right? You just intend carrying everyday objects or your belongings. 2, you intend carrying Quran along with your belongings. 3, that you intend carrying just Quran. 4, that you have no intention. And you're going to hate me for this. Inshallah, you don't hate anybody, but we're going to switch the order a little bit to make it even a little more logical. First intention, sorry note takers, but alhamdulillah nowadays you can cut and paste. You're only carrying Quran. Second, you're carrying your belongings along with the Quran. Third, you're carrying only your belongings. And fourth, you're carrying, you don't have any intention. You just have the stuff with you. Okay, so the first intention in the second list, carrying Quran only, is forbidden. If you just intend, I'm carrying my Quran. You have a book bag with your Quran in it and your pen to take notes in class. And what are you carrying? I'm carrying my Quran to class. Without ablution, that's not permissible to carry the Quran with that intention along, even if it's along with other objects. Second intention, you intend carrying your Quran along with other objects. That's permissible. Third, you intend carrying just your belongings. That's also permissible. So I'm just carrying my stuff. I'm just carrying my important things. And then the last intention that you didn't have any intention at all, itlaq they call it, you didn't specify, unspecified intention, that's permissible with Imam Ramli as opposed to Ibn Hajar al-Haytami. Allah yarhamahullah. So there's 4 possibilities. 3 are permissible. There's a difference opinion in the third, and 1 is not permissible. So like if you're traveling, you're likely to have a mushaf in your carry-on luggage. Then just carry the intention, I have my carry-on. And the mushaf happens to be there, and then it's permissible even if you lose ablution. Now, and inshallah ta'ala that was clear. And the note takers can clean it up for me a little bit. And you're welcome to put it in whatever order is most logical for you. La ilaha illallah. And then this next ruling answers a question that one of the students asked, and it is also lawful for a discriminating child to carry and touch it, meaning mushaf, for study, or a means to study, like carrying it on their way to class. So it is also lawful for a discriminating child to carry it and touch it for study, or as an aid to their studies, such as carrying it to their desk or carrying it on their way to class, as opposed to carrying it as a favor for someone without ablution. Okay? Now, in that case, we need to define a discriminating child. And this is of concern because there's a lot of rulings where a discrimination matters in a child. A discriminating child can make an intention and thus perform valid wudu and prayer and other things, other worship on their own. So the Arabic for this discriminating child is al-mumayyiz. Al-mumayyiz. and that is a child who has tamyiz, which is discrimination. So the discriminating child is a child who can eat, drink, and do istinja by his or herself. A discriminating child is a child who can eat, drink, and do istinja by his or herself. And there's some other definitions that they give, but that our shuyukh prefer. And istinja is the one that's tough. If you had kids, inshallah, you'll know what I'm talking about. Especially if they had to pour water for istinja. They didn't have some sort of hose or something. It takes a little bit of maturity for a child to be able to pull that off. Now, barakallahu feekum. Okay, there's an exception that should be mentioned here as well in this ruling, and that is the ruling of carrying books of Quranic exegesis. By that we mean tafsir or sacred law. First of all, it's offensive to touch books of sacred law or the sayings of the Salaf and so forth without ablution. So when you touch your hadith books, your tafsir books, your fiqh books, when you're in this class, when you're studying, reviewing, your notes even, you should have ablution. It's offensive not to. But from the point of view of it being forbidden, a book of Quranic exegesis, which will consist of Quran as well as a book of tafsir. It's going to consist of the Quran as well as the explanation of that scholar. If the explanation is more than the Quran, then the whole book takes the ruling of the explanation, and it is not forbidden to touch without being in a state of ablution. And in the opinion of Ibn Hajar, if you doubt if you're not completely sure that the tafsir is more, it's still permissible, or even if they're equal in the opinion of Ibn Hajar. So if you have a book and you think you're pretty sure that the tafsir is more, you're allowed to touch it with, in the opinion of Shaykh Ibn Hajar. Allah yarhamu. Naam. Naam. And translations of Quran are similar. And translations, I'll tell you, because English is much more wordy than Arabic. And Arabic will be like a third to maybe 2/3 if it's translated really well of the English. But the English is likely to be twice as much, or at least a third more than the Arabic. And then a lot of times they have footnotes. So translated Qurans are fine. Barakallahu feekum. Allah knows best. La ilaha illallah. And also we'll make a note here that, yeah, Al-Latif, that's a close-up picture. Alhamdulillah. Naam. Naam. Okay, I'm going to go through these questions. We wanted to cover the manners of the lavatory, but you have, inshallah, the beginning of the notes for next week. And I'm going to try to get you your notes earlier so you can review them, because I noticed some of the questions are reflective of the fact that you didn't have the notes ahead of time. Forgive me for that. Okay, great. The questions are bringing out Um, for Zahra, question about a catheter. I have to say I do not know. And that is because there are detailed rulings about someone who has an opening in their lower body through which urine exits, and how that relates to with respect to how high or low it is on their abdomen, and also or on their lower section, and also the reason for which the catheter is there. So if someone actually has that situation, they can email me. I'm going to post my email, inshallah ta'ala, and I'll give you an initial disclaimer. I'm tend to be kind of slow in responding to emails, and Allah helped me to improve. But they become very voluminous from all the accounts I have, and they end up sinking. First lessons. Does a child who hasn't reached puberty and who is memorizing the Quran? That was answered. They can touch the mushaf for study. However, it's adab to teach them to have wudu, but to force them to always have it is probably not a good idea, which is the reason that ruling is there, to discourage their study. What if you see a Quran at a public library? La ilaha illallah. Allahu alam. Can you speak about Quran on phones and computers and the like? Some of the younger muftis in Tarim differ about that when it's open on the screen. As for when it's not on the screen, it's no problem. Personal advice is if it's open on the screen, you should have ablution. From the point of view of adab, not from the point of view of law. As I'm saying, some of the younger muftis differ on that question from the point of view of whether it's permissible or not. Can a menstruating woman recite the Quran? I'm really glad you asked that question. That answer will come, insha'Allah ta'ala, and we'll discuss it thoroughly, insha'Allah, in its place. And the same will apply to a man in a state of major ritual impurity. So someone in major ritual impurity, janaba, meaning they've had intimate relations with their spouse, for instance, or a woman menstruating, they may not verbally recite the Quran. And that's a separate ruling that will be discussed. Here we're discussing touching it or carrying it, not reciting it. So someone in minor ritual impurity, someone who's lost their ablution, can recite from memory, or if the Quran is sitting on a stand and they're turning the pages with a pencil, for instance, they may recite. As for the recitation of someone in major ritual impurity, that ruling is coming. Can one request from the library to remove it? Allahu alam. About that. Yeah. The Hanafi school allows non-Muslims to have Qurans, if my memory doesn't fail me, and you should never really take a school from someone who it's not their main school. But that's what I've understood from the Hanafi school. And there is benefit, and a lot of people do embrace Islam because of accessing the Quran or the translation and the meanings of Quran. So I would just leave it alone, actually. As much as we have a protectiveness for Allah's book, you didn't put it there, and you're not responsible to remove it, nor would it be permissible, so don't worry about it. Can one request from the library to remove it? As there are any recordings other than this also can be the one Okay. Now Abdullah Munawwar, he asked, can one carry without wudu a booklet that has a few surahs for daily recitation? If the majority of that booklet is Quran, its ruling is that it's a Quran. If the majority of it is not Quran, for instance, you have other daily recitations, then its ruling, the whole ruling of the whole book is that it's not the Quran, and you may touch it. and carry it. For Noor, handle Quran in the past while menstruating. Wait till we study that, and also we might mention some exceptions in the Maliki school, for instance, and there's exceptions for someone studying and so forth. So hold the repentance until we study that, inshallah ta'ala. A discriminating child here for Daniel's question. By child we mean someone who's not reached puberty. So when they say mumayyiz, they mean a child like they've reached the point of discriminating, and before the point of puberty. After that, they just begin to call them baligh, that they've reached puberty, or mukallaf. They're morally responsible now. If you have a binder which you carry Quran in with a pencil and you intend carrying the both, is that okay? That's permissible, yep. Could you repeat what was said about doubt regarding which portion is larger in the tafsir? Okay, if someone doubts, they're not sure that the tafsir is more, that's permissible with Shaykh ibn Hajar. So they're unsure. Or if the two are equal, that's also permissible with Shaykh ibn Hajar. Imam Ramli differed in both of those rulings, and Allah knows best. Hadith is offensive to touch without ablution, but it's not forbidden as Quran is. That was Muhammad's question. Now, for Tafsir Jalalain counting as a mushaf, there's going to be difference of opinion there, because for a couple reasons that could be accurate, but it's not necessarily the case. The concern with Tafsir Jalalain is that just the tafsir, we know that the words of the tafsir, and someone may remember, it doesn't escape me, but there's just a few more words in the tafsir than there is in the Quran itself, which was an amazing feat, a real karama that Allah gave Jalalain, Jalaluddin al-Mahalli and Jalaluddin al-Suyuti. So the tafsir is actually more we know than the Quran, but the thing is that the way that it's normally printed, in the margins it has the Quran between parentheses surrounded by tafsir. And then it also has a whole mushaf printed in the middle. So the Quran of those prints is much more than the tafsir. Were the tafsir to be alone, or were it, for instance, the Hashia of Sabuni, the super commentary of Sabuni on Jalalain, it'd be no problem. But the issue with the way Jalalain tends to be printed is that it's printed along with a whole mushaf, so the words of the Quran turn out to be more, actually, in those prints. And Allah knows best. Now, some of them have asbab nuzul at the base, and then that might actually make the words of non-Quran more. But again, it would go back to which print it was. And ultimately, just learn the ruling. Any given book, if you were to ask about it, we would say, if the tafsir is more or equal, or you doubt in the opinion of Shaykh ibn Hajar, it's lawful. Otherwise, it's not. For Zainab, does falling asleep affect the wudu of one who takes dispensation because He is unable to control passing wind. I don't understand the question exactly. I don't understand that question. What do we do if whilst joining prayer late we make salams and forget to carry on praying? Let's deal with that when we get to prayer. Assalamu alaikum. Does touching your wife's hand nullify ablution? Yep. Yeah, it does. If you want to hold your wife's hand in the Hanafi school, ma fi shay. No problem. Hold your wife's hand in the Hanafi school, and if you're a person of azima, make wudu before you pray. If you're praying in the Shafi'i school. If one is working in a publisher or bookstore, in my case, where we deal with Qur'ans daily and serving customers who may also not have wudu, what is practical solution to this within our madhab? A practical solution in our madhab, first of all, there's no need to assume that someone doesn't have wudu. And the best practical solution that I'm aware of after that is what I've learned from Shaykh Nuh, that if there is like a bag around the Quran, the ruling changes with respect to touching it in that school, and you could make sure to always bag the Quran nicely before giving it to customers. That would help some, but you don't have to assume that they don't have ablution. There's no visual cue for you whether or not they have ablution, unless maybe Allah has opened your basira. So there's no reason to assume that they don't have it. The people of the books meet. That's a discussion that's tangent and needs to be handled at another place. Between now and then, we wouldn't advise eating quote-unquote meat of the people of the book if you strictly follow the Shafi school, because you're not likely to find one in our time that fits the conditions. Did you see abnormal menstrual bleeding was an exception to the nullifiers of ablution? No. We said that a person with chronic nullification of ablution, that person may still pray in that case because of necessity, and their details to how they pray and details to who they are. Yeah, there's two in a Jalalain. There's two complete mushafs plus the tafsir of Jalalain, which is slightly more than one mushaf. But again, it depends on how it's printed. You know, I've not seen every single print that's out there. Maybe there's some prints where they only print Jalalain without the mushaf in the middle. And also, some of them have asbab and nuzul, the causes of the revelation of various verses, at the bottom. And I've not counted that. That may be more than a complete mushaf, in which case that would make the non-Quran more than the Quran. So some that I've seen, though, it's two complete mushafs plus the tafsir. Aywa, for Abdulkarim Ahmed, we answer that question. It's makruh to touch books of sacred science, of any of the sacred sciences, without wudu. If someone has a chronic problem and they fall asleep firmly seated, would their wudu still be intact? The nullifiers of wudu, is there a distinction between touching and being touched? C.D. David's question on the relied upon position, no. For C.D. David's question on the relied upon position, it doesn't matter if you're the toucher or the touched. Being the toucher or the touched, being old or young, provided you reach the point that we mentioned as maturity, it doesn't have a bearing. There's a second position that's not the relied upon position, but is actually a strong position in the school, that the wudu of the toucher is broken, not the person who is touched. And they act on that in Hajj in order to take a dispensation from within their school when making Hajj. Okay, no worries, Sidi. For Sister Zainab, I didn't answer your question because I didn't fully understand the question. For Zainab, I didn't understand the question about someone who chronically loses their ablution from when. I didn't understand that question about sitting not breaking wudu. For the question on the second to the last question on sujood of Quran, sujood while reciting Quran, that came up today because we said that prayer is forbidden for someone whose wudu is nullified, as is prostration for Quran recitation or thanks. So you have to have wudu to do all of those. You have to have wudu to prostrate for Quran recitation, just like you have to have wudu to prostrate for thanks and to pray or to pray the funeral prayer. La ilaha illallah. If someone has a chronic problem of passing wind and they fall asleep firmly seated, provided the other conditions are fulfilled, their wudu should be intact. For Noura K, and we've gone over our time pretty significantly. In our school, does touching the skin of one's spouse through their clothing nullify one's wudu? That was the fifth of the criteria we mentioned, that there not be a barrier. So if there's a barrier, wudu is not broken. For Abdulkarim Ahmed, when doing wudu in the bathrooms that we have today, the toilet, shower, and sink in the same room, is it makruh to recite the du'as for wudu, etc.? If you're near the toilet, it is makruh. And Allah knows best. وإذا حضرت النبي محمد اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. فاتحة. You should recite the du'as in your heart without moving without speaking them to yourself. Um, Putting down the seat of the toilet doesn't change it being makruh to remember Allah there, because the concern is the place. A place prepared to relieve yourself is makruh to do dhikr. And if there's a barrier, even desirous touching doesn't break wudu for the Shafis, but it'll break it for other schools. So you want to be careful not to pray with that in that condition. In our school, it's just literal skin-to-skin touching that breaks wudu, and that verse isn't given any figurative interpretation. So desire or not desire is not a concern. Barakallah fiqh. We made dua for everyone with the Fatiha. Barakallah fiqh. Allah take you all by the hand, and please keep me in your dua. We'll see you at this time next week, inshallah ta'ala. Alhamdulillah, the browser didn't freeze this week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.